Good morning. Thank you all so much for the invitation to be here and for the welcome this morning. It was really a privilege to get to be here for the Peacemaking Conference and then to get to worship with you all this morning. I'm really, really grateful to be here among you. I, like several people have said, am with the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, and we are a nationwide network of Presbyterians who are committed to nonviolence. We've been around for 75 years. This year is our 75th year, and we're celebrating kind of all over the country this year. And so I'm really grateful to get to start some of that celebration here in California with you all. And we're an open community, so if a commitment to nonviolence is something that you hold important, we would love to have you as a part of this network. So I wanted to start by saying that some of you all who were at the Peacemaking Conference yesterday heard me talk a little bit about Colombia, South America, not the university. And I told some of you yesterday that I would be sharing some more stories from Colombia this morning, but no repeats. But I was just recently in Colombia in January, and so God is continuing to speak to me through some of those stories. And part of our commitment to our partners there is to share their stories. So that's what I'll be doing a little bit this morning through this time together. I hope that you also have experiences like that just grab you and won't let you go and make you read the Bible in new ways and make you see God in new ways. That has certainly been my experience with our partnership in Colombia. So if you'll let me, I wanted to give just a little bit of brief context about Colombia, which some of you all may know, but I certainly didn't before I started working with the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. And the Peace Fellowship has been doing accompaniment in Colombia for 15 years, so we can talk a little bit more about what that means, but I think what's important to think about as we think about Colombia is that they've been at civil war for about 60 years. Who here is under 60? Is there anybody under 60 here? Yeah. So that means for folks like us who are under 60, all that the Colombians have known who are our ages have only known war. They've only known their country at war. And who here is under 120 years old? Anybody? Yeah, okay, great. Y'all are listening. So that means that for everybody living in Colombia, everybody alive today, most of their lives has been spent with their country at war. That is most of what they have known for their lives. And that affects a people, right? It's not so different maybe than the US. We have not been at civil war, but we have known violence in different contexts for most of our lives in our country's history. So the Presbyterian Church of Colombia, in this context of civil war, decided that they were going to speak out against the violence. And they didn't side with any of the armed groups. There's kind of the government, there's these paramilitary groups, and then there's the guerrilla, which we hear so much about in our US news, the FARC, right? But the Presbyterian Church decided to speak out against the violence of all of those groups. They have a really strong commitment to nonviolence. And as they spoke out, the more active that they got in working against violence and working with people who had been victims of violence, the more they became a threat to those armed people. And so the more they were threatened, some of the pastors and leaders have been put on death lists. This happens in other parts of the world, of course, as well. And in 2004, one of the leaders, he was a professor at the Presbyterian Seminary in Barranquilla. His name is Alfredo Correa de Andres, and he was killed by paramilitaries in 2004. And that was really a turning point for the Presbyterian Church in Colombia. And they sent a letter to the Presbyterian Church of the US, that's us, and they said, you all have to come and accompany us. We're dying, and we need you to come and stand with us. If we're siblings in Christ, we are calling on you to come and be with us in our time of need. And it just so happened that the Peace Fellowship was the group that was poised to kind of help that happen. And so we've been doing that for 15 years, sending folks from the US to Colombia. Our US passports, for those of us who have them, affords us a level of protection in Colombia. And so it's actually pretty little risk to folks from the U.S. to go to Colombia and be with our siblings there. And it is a huge source of protection and even more so of pastoral accompaniment for our siblings who are experiencing this kind of violence. So our Colombian siblings have called us to stand with them as they risk. And they've called us to put our faith in action and to put our love in practice and to put our solidarity as a statement of our faith. And so, as the violence has actually decreased some over the last few years, most of our accompaniment has actually shifted to being kind of pastoral accompaniment, to being with people who have experienced violence, who have been displaced, to say, you're not alone. We may not understand what you've gone through, but we're here with you, and we feel connected to you, and we love you. And they continue, the Presbyterian Church of Colombia continues to call us to put our faith and love in action through accompaniment and advocacy. Okay, so I'm sure that many of you all, though, have read the news. And you might think, oh, but didn't Colombia sign peace accords a couple of years ago? Shouldn't there be peace there now? Yes, they did sign accords. And no, accords don't bring peace immediately, right? We know this, I think, but we have to think about it, right? Our partners say peace signed is not peace realized. And the absence of violence does not peace make, right? Peace is something more holistic than just the absence of violence. So we at PPF thought it might be time to wrap up the accompaniment program when peace accords were signed, and our partner said, nope, we need you still here, because we are just now beginning the work of building peace. And we've been at war for 60 years, and it's going to take at least that long to create peace. They're in it for the long haul, they say, because that's how long it's going to take for us to learn to love our enemies who we've been at war with for 60 years. So, when we talk about loving enemies, I want to look a little bit more closely at that passage from Luke that we read this morning. Have any of you all heard of this theologian named Walter Wink? Is he familiar? Yeah, I think he may be familiar to some people. He just passed away about 7 years ago, so maybe some of you even knew him personally. He was a Bible professor, and he says that this is one of the most misunderstood passages of the Bible. He says that this passage has generally been understood by people as teaching non-resistance to violence. Do not resist one who is evil has simply been meant to say, just let them run all over you. Give up all concern for your own justice. If they hit you on one cheek, turn the other, and let them batter you there too, which has been bad advice for women who have experienced violence particularly. And it has become a platitude, meaning extend yourself, give up everything. But, Walter Wink says, the passage can't possibly mean what we have thought it has meant for many years. Because, he says, we know that Jesus resisted evil with every fiber of his being. So he would not be teaching us non-resistance to evil. What Jesus is saying here, Wink argues, is do not fight evil on its own terms. Don't use violence to fight violence. And then he gives us some examples, which I want to actually look at. So he says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and give them the other cheek. So if somebody, things that we need to know about the context of the first century in Palestine when this text was written, is that people did not use their left hand in public. You wouldn't even gesture with your left hand in public because it was used for unclean things. So people only would use your right hand to hit somebody. And if somebody hits me with their right hand, what cheek are they going to hit me on? My left cheek. And the text says that if somebody hits you on your right cheek, so what we already know is that if for somebody to hit me on my right cheek, how would they have to hit me? It couldn't be a punch, right? It would be a backhand, right? Somebody would have had to backhand me to hit me on my right cheek. And that was a sign of how people in positions of power would hit people in positions of lower power. So it's already a power dynamic set up here, right? If somebody's hitting me on my right cheek, it means they're backhanding me, which is a sign of inferiority. And so when Jesus says, turn the other cheek, I'm going to turn this way, and what it forces is for somebody to hit me like an equal, right? They can no longer backhand me if my right cheek is away from them. So Jesus isn't advocating to invite violence, to invite people to continue to hit you. What Jesus is saying by turn the other cheek is that you're defying the power of the master. You're saying to the master, the person who has hit you, who has social power over, perhaps, saying, I refuse to be humiliated by you any longer. I am a human being just like you. I am a child of God. You can't put me down, even if you have me killed. This is clearly no way to avoid trouble, says Walter Wink. The master may have flogged you within an inch of your life, but will not be able to assert that you have no dignity. And in the second example that we hear, Jesus is essentially encouraging people, if we keep reading it, to take off almost all of their clothes if somebody asks for them for their coat. And the way that this would work is Jesus was talking to folks who were poor, right? Who were indebted. And many times a lender, if the person wasn't able to pay their debt, would say, okay, well then give me your cloak. And Jesus says, okay, then give them your cloak, and then give them your shirt, and then give them all of the clothes on your body, so that essentially a person would be standing there with no clothes on, which in that culture, and perhaps in ours too, would actually be a humiliation upon the person who was asking for the lending. Because if there's a person standing here naked and you're holding all of their clothes, what does that make you? It makes you greedy. It makes you look poorly in the eyes of the culture. So you can see that in this passage, Walter Wink says that Jesus is actually proposing a third way. Not meeting violence with violence, not hitting back, and also not just accepting it passively. It's a third way. This is what it means to love our enemies, to show a third way, and to refuse to play by the rules of violence and domination and humiliation. And so when I hear this story, I think immediately of our partners in Colombia. Because here's the thing about Colombia, especially in the coast and rural parts of the country, is that there is no one who has not been affected by violence. We already said that everybody has known their country at war, but almost everyone has lost somebody to the violence or been displaced from their land when armed groups come and force them to leave it. And in Urabá, one of the regions where we work, there have been people living there only really for about 50 years, which means that everybody who's there has been displaced from somewhere else. So everybody has a story of loss. And it's from all sides, right? People have been affected by violence of the guerrilla and the government and the paramilitaries. And a part of the peace accords that we talked about that are kind of in effect right now is that the FARC, that guerrilla group, they live in these, they're called reintegration zones. There's about 20-something around the country. And it's these zones where they have gone to live together. They disarmed. They came there with arms, and then there was a process of turning in all of their weapons. So now they're living in these reintegration zones with no weapons, a group that's been armed for 60 years. It's pretty incredible. And as they live there, at least until August, they're seeking to learn new ways to make money in an established economy so that they can reintegrate into society. After years of being fighters, it's all that they've done their whole lives. But there's still a lot of stigma against these ex-combatants in Colombian society, and the new Colombian government is actually really right-wing and is trying to thwart the peace accords. But many of the churches, including the Presbyterian Church of Colombia, they are accompanying these reintegration communities during what's a really precarious time for peace. And here's what's so remarkable about that, is that many of our Presbyterian siblings have experienced violence at the hands of these people of the FARC who they are now accompanying and supporting. Many of them have lost even close family members because of the violence of the FARC. But they know that to build peace, they have to learn to love their enemy. And so they're doing that. They're providing pastoral care, they're doing political advocacy for the folks there. It's pretty incredible. Talk about loving your enemy. And really, in this case, the enemy in this moment, if we can call them that, is the Colombian government, who is trying to stall the peace accords. But the Colombian people, even though their government may be trying to thwart the peace accords, put in policies that are unjust, policies that create violence for people. I don't know if that may sound familiar to other governments that you know of. But the people know that they must work for peace on a local level, and that regardless of what the government is doing, they have to keep working for peace. It's a kind of third way to passivity, or just expecting the government to do everything, versus taking up arms and trying to force the government to do something that they're not, that would create violence again. They're finding a third way to create some kind of peace on a local level in their own communities. They know they can't sit around and wait on the government to do the right thing, and they know it's everyone's work to do to build peace. It's like they're turning the other cheek to the Colombian government, just like Joseph did in this Genesis story when he goes to his brothers. I think that this image of Joseph weeping over his brothers is what I think of when I think of these Presbyterian pastors and leaders going to these ex-combatant communities. That's what it means to build peace. Is what Cornel West says is justice. He says justice is what love looks like in public. And I think that our Colombian Presbyterian siblings are doing that. They are practicing love in public. And because of this work, the Colombian leaders are actually being asked to facilitate tables of dialogue between different groups, armed groups that had been fighting. Their work has been so powerful, they have so learned how to love their enemies, that they are being asked by local groups to help facilitate peace. They're known for being peacemakers, and they're called upon in this moment. And I wonder what it would look like for the PCUSA to have that kind of strong identity as peacemakers. I think some local congregations have that identity. Maybe you all do in your own community, and I hope that you'll tell me about the work that you're doing after this. But I wonder what it would look like if we were the church that was known perhaps to pray for ICE agents, even as we refuse to let them in our houses of worship if they are coming to deport somebody in our congregation. Or maybe it looks like being the church where trans and queer youth know that they can go to be safe, when most of our society, and let's face it, most of our churches are anything but safe for queer and trans youth. Maybe your church is known for this. But I think as a denomination and as people of faith, in all of our congregations, we have to think, what do we want to be known for? How are we going to be known for putting our love in action? And the good news, as we consider this and discern this, is that we have models, like the Presbyterian Church of Colombia, like churches in our own community, and that we're not alone. Our partners in Colombia and around the world accompany us as we seek to do justice work, just as we accompany them. Like the Colombians who are in it for the long haul, we know that loving our enemies is lifelong work. It's a lifelong calling. And it's more than just being nice. It's practicing justice. It's practicing love in public, love in action. Amen.